Not only were the Greeks masters of geometry, they were also masters of optical illusions. Therefore, they built the Parthanas slightly incorrectly, quote-unquote. When Grock AI digitally reconstructed the Greek Pantheon, no one anticipated the revelations that would follow. Beneath 2,400 years of marble, it uncovered hidden chambers, long-forgotten rituals, and astonishing construction secrets. Parthonon, the gleaming marble, the biggest and most beautiful Greek temple that existed at least in mainland Greece at this point. The discoveries left scholars stunned and forced historians to rethink everything they believed about ancient Athens. What Grok uncovered in the southwest corner transformed our entire perception of the Parthenon. Bronze vessels sealed within walls, solar alignments tracking sacred time, and subterranean treasuries linking earth and sky. The AI's reconstruction exposed mysteries that endured empires, wars, and centuries. But the question remains, are we ready to face what history has been hiding? Before the columns, there was a hill. Today, the Parthenon crowns the Athenian skyline like a relic suspended in time. Its white marble catching the sunlight, its broken columns still defiant against centuries of wind and war. From a distance, it looks eternal, almost untouched. But the truth, the Parthenon, has lived many lives, rebuilt, scarred, repurposed, and resurrected. And now, thanks to Grock AI, we're finally starting to see it as it once was, and maybe as it was always meant to be. Long before marble met chisel, there was only the hill, a 150-meter-high limestone plateau that watched over what would one day become Athens. The ancient world knew this rocky outcrop as the Acropolis, the high city. But to early Athenians, it was something far more intimate, sacred ground. Here, before temples or tourists, people brought offerings to unseen gods, whispered prayers to the wind, and burned sacrifices to Athena, the fierce protector of the city that would bear her name. Archaeological traces show that the Acropolis was inhabited as far back as the 4th millennium B.C.E., but its story truly begins in the 7th and 6th centuries B.C.E. During this time, Athens wasn't yet the beacon of philosophy and art we imagine. It was a city wrestling for power, enduring coups and revolts. Why do we create monuments like the Parthanon? And the answer is we want to try and imitate. The tyrant Pisistratus built early shrines to Athena and even an entry gate to the hill. His successors expanded the sanctuary, raising a Doric limestone temple known as the Hecatompedon, literally the hunt-footed. It stood roughly where the Parthenon stands today, decorated with mythic sculptures, including a strange three-bodied serpent whose beards were painted dark blue. These early temples were humble compared to what was coming. They were built, destroyed, and rebuilt again, especially after the Persians invaded in 480 B.C.E., torching Athens and leveling its sacred sites. The Athenians, furious yet determined, buried the shattered remains of their temples in ritual pits beneath the Acropolis. These Persian debris pits would one day become one of the richest archaeological finds in Greece, a kind of sacred time capsule. When the smoke of war cleared, Athens was no longer content to survive. It wanted to transcend. The Persian wars had proven Greek unity could overcome an empire. Now Athens wanted to immortalize that victory in stone, under the leadership of Pericles, statesman, orator, and visionary. Athens began an ambitious rebuilding project in 447 B.C.E. His dream to turn the Acropolis into the beating heart of Greek civilization. At the center of that dream rose the Parthenon, designed by architects and Callicrates and brought to life by the legendary sculptor Phidias. This was no modest temple. It was an architectural declaration built from Pentelic marble, quarried some 16 kilometers away. The Parthenon stood 69, 5 meters long and 39 meters wide, supported by 46 Doric columns, each over 10 meters tall. The very marble shimmered faintly gold in the Attic sun thanks to its natural iron content. So if you were standing at the base of the Parthenon, and if the columns didn't stop after a certain number of feet, greater than, and inside the temple's heart within its main chamber, Orcella stood Phidias's masterpiece Athena Parthonos, the virgin goddess. Towering nearly 12 meters high, she was fashioned of gold and ivory, a figure both beautiful and terrifying, embodying wisdom and war in perfect balance. Her spear caught the light that entered through the temple doorway, reflecting a flash across the city below, a divine signal from goddess to people. But the Parthenon wasn't just big, it was brilliant. The architects used mind-bending mathematical refinements that modern engineers still study. The columns, for instance, aren't perfectly straight. They bulge slightly. In the middle, a technique called inticus to counteract the optical illusion that would make them appear thinner from a distance. The temple's base curves upward at the center to prevent a visual sag. Even the corner columns are subtly thicker and lean inward to compensate for the bright attic sky behind them. These weren't random artistic choices. They were deliberate manipulations of human perception. The Parthenon didn't just dominate the landscape. It played tricks on the eye to appear flawless from every angle. And then came the stories carved in stone designed to outlive the tellers. The east pediment showed the miraculous birth of Athena, springing, fully armored from the head of Zeus. The west pediment depicted her legendary contest with Poseidon for the city's patronage, Athena offering the olive tree of peace, Poseidon striking the earth to produce a salt spring. Guess which gift won? The frieze. A continuous marble band wrapping around the inner chamber portrayed the Panathenaic procession, a grand festival held every 4 years when citizens carried a new robe, the peplo, to Athena's statue. And along the outer walls, 92 metopes, square, sculpted panels told tales of cosmic conflict. East side, the gigantomachi, gods versus giants. West, the Amazon, Maki, Greeks versus warrior women. South, the centaur, man against beast. North, scenes from the Trojan War. Every panel proclaimed the same message. Civilization triumphs over chaos. Athens triumphs over all. By the time the last chisel fell silent, the Parthenon wasn't just a temple. It was a manifesto. It celebrated religion, yes, but also power, order, and Athenian identity. The building itself was a sermon in stone. For centuries, scholars have obsessed over its design, measuring every angle, debating the meaning of its sculptures, and marveling at its precision. Yet, for all that effort, much of the Parthenon story remained buried. Its construction, secrets, its lost chambers, its inner logic, wars, earthquakes, explosions, all conspired to erase parts of its history. What survived was beautiful, but incomplete. That's where Grock AI came in. Archaeologists had long dreamed of digitally rebuilding the Parthenon. But Grok wasn't just another modeling tool. It could analyze millions of data points from laser scans, photogrammetry, and archaeological reports, finding patterns invisible to the human eye. When researchers fed Grok every detail, every crack, measurement, and shadow, they expected it to fill in missing fragments, maybe smooth out the rough edges of history. Instead, what it found changed everything. Beneath that flawless geometry, beneath the marble precision that defined Greek genius, Grok began detecting something that shouldn't exist at all, the marble that should have been solid. When Grock AI began its deep scan of the Parthenon, the expectation was pretty straightforward. Digitally restore what centuries had eroded. Map every crack, fill every gap, rebuild a perfect virtual twin. Simple, right? But as it turns out, perfection hides secrets. Using ultra-precise 3D scans and subsurface imaging capable of peering straight through marble, Grok mapped every millimeter of the Parthenon with nanometer accuracy. Inside the intabe, the horizontal beam that sits above the temple's famous Doric columns, Grok detected irregular voids, pockets of space carved deep within marble blocks that should have been completely solid. These anomalies appeared consistently behind the triglyphs, those 3 grooved tablets that alternate with metops to create the temple's signature rhythm and order. The Parthenon is an amazingly beautiful structure. The design, the spacing of each stone is so perfect that it inspires just to look at. At first, the team assumed it was some ancient construction flaw, centuries of shifting stone or damage from war and earthquakes. But the AI flagged them as unaccounted voids. Someone had created these spaces on purpose. That realization sent ripples through the team. Because if the Parthanon's builders, those near-legendary artisans under Pericles' grand vision, had carved deliberate hollows into the marble, it meant they weren't just building a temple. They were encoding something within it. And that's when archaeologists began looking back at older data, particularly the 2012 restoration work on the southwest corner. What they found suddenly made sense in a way it hadn't before. In March 2012, the Acropolis Restoration Service was carefully dismantling part of the Parthonon and Table Act. It was routine conservation work. Replace damaged marble. Clean, stabilize, repeat. But when workers removed the 14th triglyph from the north side of the west facade, they stumbled on something extraordinary. A narrow cavity filled with undisturbed soil and marble chips sealed for nearly 2,500 years. Inside that cavity was a small bronze bowl called a faial mazanalos, a type of shallow libation vessel with a raised boss at its center. It measured about 22 centimeters across with delicate repus wreaths of hammered leaves encircling its rim. Near the lip of the bowl, faint and nearly invisible, was an inscription, a dedication to Athena. But the bowl wasn't alone. Inside it lay the partial leg bone of an animal, and beside it, a slender bronze tube, part of an olos, an ancient wind instrument often used in sacred ceremonies. Around them, dark streaks of ash and soot stained the soil. There had been fire-controlled, localized, ritualistic. The archaeologists froze. This wasn't debris. This was a ceremony sealed in stone. Later analysis dated the bronze bowl to the 6th century B.C.E., at least 100 years older than the Parthenon itself. That discovery changed everything. It meant that whoever placed it there, perhaps one of the builders or maybe the architects, Ios and Calcrates themselves, had deliberately chosen an ancient sanctified object, not a fresh offering, but one already imbued with divine history, an heirloom of faith. From this corner, the view stretches clear to the sea, the same waters where Athenian ships once defeated the Persians. So, it made sense that an offering was made there. For more than 2 millennia, the offering stayed hidden, undisturbed, unrecorded, unimagined until Grok's lasers and algorithms stumbled upon the truth. The marble wasn't entirely marble. Historians now believe this wasn't an isolated act. The Acropolis, after all, was sacred long before the Parthenon's columns ever rose. Its stones were layered with rituals, each generation adding its own silent testimony to the divine. And the bronze file was more than an artifact. It was a clue, a window into the mind of the builders who viewed construction not as labor, but as devotion carved into stone. To modernize, it's almost poetic. The idea that the Parthenon itself might be a kind of prayer whispered not in words, but in marble, music, and fire. Yet Grok's sensors showed more. Behind other triglyphs, faint echoes of similar cavities appeared, some empty, some unreadable. It was as if the temple itself held a network of tiny shrines invisible for millennia. And when Grok compared these anomalies with old half-forgotten excavation notes and scattered restoration reports from decades past, a new pattern began to form, one that hinted at something even stranger: metal, ritual, and mystery. While mapping the temple's hidden cavities, Grok began to notice a strange correlation. Parthenon combines both the Doric order and the Ionic, and that's a geographical distinction more than anything. The anomalies it detected, those deliberate voids inside supposedly solid stone, seemed to align with earlier discoveries of bronze artifacts made during past restorations. In short, the temple had been trying to tell us this story for decades. We just hadn't been listening. Back in 1986, during a standard restoration of the Parthenon's east end, workers stumbled on a small bronze bowl wedged between 2 architrave blocks, the great horizontal beams resting atop the columns. It was dented, misshapen, and streaked with red pigment known as miltos, a kind of ancient red ochre paint used by Greek builders. At the time, the find didn't exactly cause a sensation. Archaeologists figured it was a construction accident, probably a painter's mixing bowl that slipped through the cracks and got trapped inside the marble. The incident made a brief appearance in restoration notes, and then quietly faded into obscurity. Fast forward a few decades. In 1994, another team repairing the Parthenon's west porch uncovered something eerily similar. Another bronze bowl, this time near the southeast corner. Like the first, it bore stains of miltos and appeared to have been used as a painter's pot. But upon closer inspection, this paint bowl turned out to be something very different. The broken body of a kylix, a stemmed wine cup used in Greek symposia. The base and handles were missing, but its shape and craftsmanship were unmistakable. This kylix wasn't just old. It was ancient even by Parthonon standards, dating from 500 to 480 BCE, about the same age as the bronze file discovered behind the triglyph in 2012. Along its rim, a faint inscription identified the cup's original owner, Naros, a name lost to history, but one that once carried weight enough to offer a personal dedication to Athena. And so, the story took a strange turn. These weren't just random objects. They were meant for prayer, not for paint. So, why were they turning up inside the temple's marble? When Grock AI compiled all three discoveries, the 1986 bowl, the 1994 kicks, and the 2012 file, it did what no human mind could do. It mapped their positions precisely in three-dimensional space. That's when something extraordinary appeared. The placements weren't random. When plotted on Grok's reconstruction of the Parthonon, the three bronze vessels formed a perfect geometric pattern, one that corresponded to celestial coordinates. Specifically, the alignment matched the path of the sunrise over Athens on Athena's feast day, the Pantheon. Historians had long suspected that the Parthenon's architecture incorporated astronomical symbolism, alignments with the solstice, the equinox, the sacred times of Athenian ritual. But this was something new. The very offerings themselves seemed to form part of a cosmic map. But Grok didn't stop there. When the AI simulated the temple's acoustics using its 3D data, another layer of mystery emerged. Those same bronze vessels sealed within the marble might not have been silent ornaments at all. Interestingly, these finds also reframed how historians viewed the Parthenon's construction itself. The builders weren't just laborers, they were craftsmen working inside a living ritual. And I think if you're an Athenian citizen walking, doing your everyday work, and then you see the Acropolis in the center of the city, mixing pigments, shaping marble, even painting the temple. Every act was an offering in its own right. Yes, painting. Because contrary to the modern image of a pristine white Parthenon, the original temple was bursting with color. Red, blue, and gold adorned the sculptures and pediments. The Miltos pigment found in those bronze bowls wasn't random. It was part of the temple's brilliant polychar. For centuries, art historians refused to believe that Greek temples were painted. The myth of pure white marble became so deeply rooted that anyone suggesting otherwise was dismissed as eccentric. But modern science proved them wrong. Ultraviolet light and high-intensity scans by archaeologist Vincent Brinkman revealed traces of pigment across nearly every surviving sculpture. So yes, the Parthenon once glowed in full color beneath the Athenian sun. Today, with Grok's analysis, all those scattered fragments, the dented bowl, the shattered kylix, the hidden file, finally speak in harmony. It's tempting to think that the builders knew exactly what they were doing, leaving behind not just art, but a message. And as Grok continued its search, it began to notice something else. The same pattern, the same energy, but this time it wasn't inside the Parthenon at all. It was waiting beyond it, Means temple. While Grok had been busy decoding the Parthenon's hidden chambers, it also cast its digital gaze beyond the Acropolis, scanning the landscape for echoes of the same sacred geometry. That's when it found something unusual. Not in the grand ruins of Athens, but out in the quiet hills where goats still graze among ancient stones. About 19 kilometers southeast of the city, in a rugged place known as the Var Hills, or Varan Hills, archaeologists had recorded over 2,000 pieces of ancient graffiti. Not the spray-painted kind we think of today, but small, careful carvings etched into marble outcrops by shepherds. Men who spent long, solitary days watching over their flocks, passing time by scratching images into the stone. Their drawings told ordinary stories, ships sailing toward the horizon, warriors locked in combat, animals mid-leap and temples standing tall under the sun. They were like messages from a forgotten social media feed, bits of imagination, boredom, and belief left behind in the hills. But among those thousands of carvings, one stood out. It showed a temple, not just any temple, but one with a stepped base, Doric columns, and a peaked roof rendered with surprising precision. Whoever carved it wasn't doodling. They were remembering something or maybe witnessing it. Next to the image was a short inscription in ancient Greek, Hekatompadon Mekonos. Roughly translated, it means the 100-foot building of Maon. The name suggested both a maker Maon and a measurement, the 100-foot temple. That alone made the team pause. The term Hekatompedon wasn't random. It appeared in old Athenian records, texts from before the Persian invasion, describing a 100-foot temple on the Acropolis, long before the Parthenon was ever built. Scholars had argued for centuries over what it referred to. Some said it was just a storehouse for sacred treasures. Others thought it was an older temple that once stood where the Parthonon does now. But now, in the lonely Var Hills, a shepherd named Meon seemed to have drawn it. When Grok analyzed the carving, it dated the lettering to the 6th century B.C.E., at least 50 years before construction of the Parthonon began. That timing flipped everything upside down. If Meon's drawing came before the Parthonon, what temple had he seen? Grok did what it does best: compare, layer, and connect. It overlaid Macon's temple with early blueprints and proportions of known Athenian structures, and the match was uncanny. The spacing of the columns, the three-step foundation, even the ratio of width to length, all mirrored the later Parthenon's design. This wasn't a coincidence. It was continuity. Somehow knowledge of that sacred architecture, its proportions, its rhythm, its symbolism had traveled beyond Athens. Maybe through builders, stonemasons, or draftsmen who practiced their craft outside the city. Maybe through oral tradition, stories told around fires where the idea of a 100-foot temple to Athena was already part of the cultural imagination long before marble met chisel. And here in a wind-swept hillside far from the grandeur of the Acropolis, a simple herdsman had carved what might have been the world's first sketch of the Parthenon's ancestor. The more Grok compared Mon's graffiti to archaeological data from Athens, the clearer the story became. Beneath the Parthenon's foundations, archaeologists had long found remnants of an older structure. Scorched marble fragments, charred roof tiles, and sculptural debris bearing traces of intense fire. These weren't random ruins. They were the remains of that earlier temple, the old Hecatempedon, destroyed when Xerxes' army invaded and burned the Acropolis. After the war, the Athenians did something remarkable. They didn't rebuild right away. Instead, they buried the fragments in ceremonial pits, treating them as sacred relics rather than trash. They left the ruins as a silent reminder of Persian aggression and a promise that one day Athens would rise again. Those buried relics, the cracked pediments, the charred columns now rest in the Acropolis Museum. And when Grok's pattern recognition compared their proportions with Mac's drawing, everything aligned perfectly. Even the decorative motifs matched known archaic styles from the 6th century B.C.E. It was undeniable. Mac's temple was no idle sketch. It was a witness statement, the only surviving image of the old temple of Athena, the Parthenon's spiritual forerunner. When Pericles began his grand rebuilding program in 447 B.C.E., his architects weren't starting from scratch. They were standing on sacred ground already layered with memory, myth, and ashes. By erecting the Parthenon atop the ruins of the old Hecatomped, Athens made a bold declaration: our faith endures and beauty will rise from fire. And here's the curious part. This link between shepherds and scholars, between mountain graffiti and monumental architecture, it suggests that sacred knowledge wasn't locked away in temples or guarded by priests. It circulated, passed in whispers, sketches, and songs. Maybe Mon had once worked on the Acropolis himself. Maybe he was an apprentice builder practicing the lines of a design that hadn't yet become reality. Either way, his hand preserved a moment no historian ever recorded. And as Grok pieced together these ancient messages, it realized something profound. Fingerprints of the builders. When Grock AI began scanning the Parthenon, most expected the usual measurements. Material composition, maybe a few restoration insights. What nobody anticipated were the whispers of the people who had built it, etched not in writing, but in the marble itself. Grok called them fingerprints of the builders. Beneath the grandeur of the Parthenon's perfect symmetry, Grok detected tiny, almost imperceptible variations, microscopic tool marks that no eye, ancient or modern, could have noticed unaided. Each mark carried rhythm and intention. The pace of a craftsman's hand, the weight of his hammer, the angle of his chisel. When Grok compiled and compared these subtle variations, patterns began to emerge. Some cuts were sharp and deliberate, others light and rhythmic, almost musical. Grok identified 47 distinct signatures, unique combinations of tool angles, depth patterns, and finishing textures. Behind everyone was a person, an apprentice testing his control, a master mason shaping perfection, a weary worker finishing his shift under the blinding Athenian sun. These weren't random variations. Grok's analysis revealed clusters of similar markings, suggesting that certain groups of stones had been shaped by the same teams, families perhaps, or mentor-apprentice pairs working side by side. Their rhythm was almost conversational, a back and forth in marble. The AI reconstructed the working sequences, showing how the Parthenon had risen block by block, as if watching history play in reverse, chisels striking in harmony, one century's labor unfolding in minutes. The marks also hinted at coded communication. A few recurring patterns looked like tally marks or initials, personal symbols of ownership or pride. Maybe one mason, satisfied with his work, left a secret flourish beneath a column base, knowing only the gods would ever see it. Then came something unexpected. Grok noticed that the alignment of certain stones shifted midway through construction. Slight changes in technique, pacing, and clamp spacing. The data suggested a change in leadership or funding. Perhaps political pressure or the financial tremors of war had reached even the marble. Ancient Greek temples used no mortar. Every block had to fit so perfectly that gravity and friction alone held them steady. Iron clamps and butterfly or H shapes were used to lock stones together sealed with molten lead. Grok mapped each one, revealing a fascinating irregularity. The southwest corner of the Parthonon had denser, tighter clamp placement. It wasn't random. That same corner was where the hidden ritual file, bronze vessels, and sacred offerings had been discovered earlier. It seemed the builders had known this spot bore unique weight. One section of the north wall showed signs of being disassembled and rebuilt, possibly to correct a measurement error. Even the most celebrated architects of Athens miscalculated sometimes. And yet, they adapted. They fixed. They persevered. The Parthenon wasn't born flawless from divine blueprint. It was sculpted through sweat, correction, and patience. Each day, the workers climbed that sacred rock, knowing they were building something meant to outlast their lives, their names, even their city's fleeting glory, and they succeeded. Their legacy isn't just the Parthenon's columns or friezes. It's those faint tool marks still visible under magnification, still whispering after centuries. We were here. We built this. But Grok's greatest revelation wasn't above ground. It was buried deep beneath the temple where earth met eternity. The foundations of faith. For centuries, the Parthenon seemed like an open book. Columns, symmetry, marble perfection. Parthonon, the gleaming marble, the biggest and most beautiful Greek temple that existed at. But Grock AI's final scans revealed something the ancients had kept hidden, not in plain sight, but far below it. Because while the world looked up at the temple's beauty, the real secret of faith lay underground. It began with ground-penetrating radar, those pulsing waves that let machines see through stone and soil. Grok's sensors swept beneath the Parthenon's marble floor, expecting little more than solid bedrock. What came back, however, was a pattern of echoes that didn't belong. Under the temple's western and eastern halves, the data lit up like constellations, geometric shapes and dense patches of metal embedded deep in the earth. Under the Parthenon's western side, Grok mapped out something extraordinary. Ancient limestone foundations sitting at a slightly different angle than the marble temple above. These weren't random stones or later repairs. They were the bones of an older structure. Historians had long whispered about a predecessor to the Parthenon, an early temple called the Hecatompedon, the 100-footer. It had stood here centuries before Pericles' golden age, before Athens ruled the seas, back when faith was raw and personal. The limestone traces Grok found matched its dimensions almost exactly. It was as if the new Parthenon had been deliberately planted atop its ancestor, Athens' greatest monument built on the ghost of its own beginnings. The discovery reframed everything. The Parthenon wasn't simply a temple to Athena. It was a reused manuscript, a layered testament to centuries of devotion. Every generation of Athenians had added to the same sacred hill, burying the old, not out of disrespect, but reverence. But the real surprise lay beneath the eastern half. Grok's scans revealed several small chambers, each roughly 2 meters square. Whoever designed the Parthenon had intentionally built around them, like a shrine preserving older relics of faith. It was designed to allow at least 10,000 Athenians and dozens of sacrificial oxen onto the open space around the Temple of Athena. In a way, it was architectural archaeology, an ancient civilization honoring its own past while reaching for something greater. Inside these hidden rooms, Grok detected metallic signatures, dense bronze or iron masses, likely ceremonial objects, votive offerings, or early treasuries. They pulsed on the radar like buried heartbeats. And one chamber in particular stood out. A concentration of metal directly beneath the spot where the colossal statue of Athena once towered inside the temple. Coincidence? Hardly. It was alignment by design. The goddess above, the offering below, heaven mirrored by earth. Beneath the polished marble, beneath the sculpted gods and stories of Olympus, lay something more primal. The faith of those who came before, sealed in stone. When the Persians destroyed the earlier temples, Athenians buried the ruins in the Acropolis soil. That much we already knew. But Grok's findings suggest that long before that act of preservation, the Athenians were already doing something similar, protecting their sacred spaces by folding them into new ones. It's as if each generation said, "Don't destroy, transform." These layers tell a quiet story of continuity. Faith wasn't reinvented with every new temple. It evolved like sediment building into a mountain. The Parthenon's beauty above ground drew the eye. Its foundations hidden beneath centuries of dust held the soul. One could imagine the moment of construction. Stonecutters carving foundations not just into rock, but into memory. They would have known about the older chambers, the soft hum of the ground beneath them, the careful way they avoided disturbing it. Maybe a priest whispered a prayer before the first marble block was set, honoring the ancient spirits below. And when the statue of Athena was finally raised, her feet rested quite literally on the buried devotion of centuries. Grok's discoveries turned the Parthenon from a monument of stone into a living record of devotion. Beneath its columns lies a story of continuity, not of conquest or replacement, but of remembrance. The temple wasn't built to erase what came before, but to honor it. Faith, like architecture, is cumulative. Every new layer strengthens the one below. And in that sense, the Parthenon isn't just a temple to Athena. It's a physical map of how humans have tried again and again to touch eternity. And when Grok completed its reconstruction, a final question emerged. Not just how the Parthenon was built, but why it was built the way it was. It asked why. Why was the Parthenon built this way? So vast, so balanced, so deliberate. The answer it proposed wasn't simple. In Grok's final report, the Parthenon emerged not as a single-purpose monument, but as a triple-coated masterpiece, a temple, a treasury, and a message. At its core, the Parthenon was sacred ground, a home for Athena Parthanos, the warrior goddess who guarded the city. The Athena Parthonos was an ancient sculpture located inside the Parthenon in Athens. Athenians didn't separate faith from daily life. To them, religion was politics, art, duty, and pride rolled into one. The temple's inner sanctum housed Phidias's towering statue of Athena. Gold, ivory, and awe. To enter that space was to feel the hum of something larger than yourself. Not just belief, but belonging. But as Grok's data showed, the Parthenon's sacred function was only the outer layer of a much deeper design. Tucked behind the glory of the goddess stood another truth. The Parthenon was also a bank. Quite literally, Athens was the leader of the Dian League, a coalition of Greek city-states formed after the Persian Wars. On paper, the League was a noble alliance, a united front against Persia. In practice, it was something more complicated. An empire with Athens at its center and everyone else paying tribute to it. That tribute, silver, gold, and goods, was meant to fund collective defense. But Pericles, ever the strategist, decided to move the League's treasury from the island of Dos to Athens itself, citing security. Convenient, right? Suddenly, all that wealth sat in Athenian hands, and a significant portion of it found its way into marble and art. So, the Parthenon, radiant under the Attic sun, wasn't just a spiritual beacon. It was a vault holding both offerings to the goddess and the collective fortune of an empire. And this, Grok concluded, was the Parthenon's true genius. It wasn't just a temple or a treasury. It was propaganda carved in marble. Every detail announced Athenian dominance. The marble came from Mount Pentelicus within Athenian territory. The sculptors and builders were Athenian or worked under Athenian supervision. The funds paid by other city-states, supposed allies who had little choice in the matter. Even its position on the Acropolis, visible from every direction and from ships entering Piraeus Harbor, was deliberate. And here's the wild part. It was built in only 9 years. For a structure of such size and detail, that's lightning fast by ancient standards. Most temples took decades, even generations. Why the rush? Grok's data hinted at political urgency. Pericles wanted the Parthenon finished while Athens was still at its peak, while the League's funds flowed freely while he still held power, while the city's confidence was absolute. Because history has a way of turning fast. Just 7 years after the Parthenon was completed, war erupted. Athens and Sparta clashed in the Peloponnesian War, a brutal decades-long struggle that drained the Greek world. By the time it ended, Athens had lost its empire, its fleet, and its dominance. If construction had been delayed even a few years, the Parthenon might never have risen at all. So, in a way, the Parthenon became a time capsule, Athens' last triumphant breath before decline. Grok's reconstruction revealed that the building's perfection wasn't just aesthetic, it was ideological. Every column, every ratio, every alignment spoke of control, order, mastery. However, the columns vary in size. They get bigger in the center. From a distance, they made it so well that it actually looks like a straight line. Another mystery is how has the Parthenon standing atop one of the most earthquake-prone regions on Earth survived for over 2 millennia? Well, Grok solved that, too. Its analysis combined with recent studies reveal its astonishing secret, a triple anti-seismic design. Despite lacking a foundation, the temple is remarkably earthquake-resistant. The first layer of protection lies in massive, smooth marble slabs beneath its steps, which slide slightly during tremors. The second comes from metal joints filled with lead, absorbing seismic energy and preventing rust. The third is found in the segmented marble columns designed to flex and shift without breaking. Together, these features let the Parthenon sway but never fall. Through Grok's eyes, the Parthenon wasn't a ruin. It was a message encoded across millennia. A temple to the divine, a vault of empire, a monument to the human desire to be remembered. What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.